Picture this. You come home from a 3-day business trip and there's a concrete truck pulling away from your driveway. You walk to your backyard, and your family's 40-year-old private well, the one your grandfather drilled with his own hands, is filled solid with industrial concrete. Still wet, still gray, still absolutely unbelievable. There's a hand-lettered sign stuck in the ground like some twisted lawn ornament. Unauthorized water source. Compliance enforced. Your security camera footage shows HOA President Darlene Wickham directing the whole operation at 6 in the morning while you were sleeping in a hotel 2 states away. $8,000 of crystal clear water source, destroyed, just like that. But here's what Darlene didn't know. I'd spent 15 years as a municipal water systems inspector. And by sunrise the next day, every faucet in their precious clubhouse would run bone dry. What would you do if someone destroyed your family's water source while you were away? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Let me take you back to where this whole nightmare started. My name's Marcus Thornfield, I'm 52, and I just inherited my grandfather's place in what used to be the quiet farming community of Willowbrook Estates. 3 beautiful acres with a 1940s farmhouse that had more character in its weathered siding than most of these cookie-cutter McMansions had in their entire architectural vocabulary. The property came with something special, a private well that Grandpa Frank drilled himself back in 1963. 15 gallons per minute of the clearest, coldest water you've ever tasted. No chlorine, no fluoride, no municipal additives. Just pure groundwater filtered through 40 feet of limestone and sand. That well had been serving our family longer than most of these neighbors had been alive. But then there was Darlene Wickham, HOA president for 8 long tyrannical years. Real estate agent by trade, dictator by passion. She drove a white BMW with vanity plates reading HOA Boss. And yes, that's exactly as subtle as it sounds. Darlene lived in an $800,000 McMansion with her husband, who happened to sit on the city council. Convenient, right? This woman was obsessed with what she called community standards. She'd measure your grass with an actual ruler and fine you if it exceeded 3 inches. She once made a 70-year-old widow repaint her mailbox because the shade of blue was unapproved per HOA Guidelines Section 12-7. 3 months before the concrete incident, Darlene sent me a certified letter because apparently she doesn't believe in normal human communication. The letter claimed my well violated aesthetic guidelines and demanded I connect to city water. The hookup fee? $12,000. Her generous alternative? Abandon the well that had served my family for decades. I responded with copies of all my legal documentation, property surveys from 1958, grandfathered water rights, easement agreements that predated the HOA by 30 years, the kind of paperwork that makes lawyers smile and HOA presidents lose sleep. Darlene's reply was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive bureaucracy. We'll see about that. The morning I discovered my concrete-filled well, the diesel smell from the truck still hung in the air like a threat. I could hear the echo of those engines rumbling down Maple Street, and the wet cement had that metallic tang that sticks in your throat. When I touched that hastily painted compliance sign, the paint was still tacky under my fingertips. See, Willowbrook Estates was one of those developments caught between 2 worlds. 47 homes averaging $450,000 each. Half the residents were retirees who remembered when this area was actually farmland. The other half were young families who bought into the HOA dream of manicured perfection and enforced conformity. The tension had been building for years between the old guard original residents like me and what I like to call the HOA newcomers, people who actually wanted someone else to tell them what color they could paint their shutters. But here's what made this whole situation particularly interesting. The city's water contract was up for renewal, a $2.3 million annual deal that kept the municipal budget afloat. And Darlene's husband, being on the city council, had a very vested interest in making sure everyone stayed connected to that profitable city water system. The pieces were all there. I just hadn't put them together yet. Standing there in my backyard, staring at what used to be my family's water source, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. That old familiar anger that comes from watching petty people abuse whatever tiny bit of power they've managed to grab. But anger without strategy is just noise. And I had 15 years of municipal water systems knowledge rattling around in my head, just waiting for the right opportunity to put it to use. Little did Darlene know, She'd just picked a fight with someone who understood exactly how fragile her precious city water contract really was. The day after the concrete incident, I found another certified letter waiting in my mailbox. This time it wasn't just Darlene's amateur hour intimidation tactics. She'd escalated to bringing in the big guns, a lawyer. The legal demand letter was printed on expensive letterhead with one of those law firm names that sounds like a funeral home: Blackstone, Whitmore and Associates. 3 pages of legal gibberish that boiled down to this: my well created a significant health hazard and materially diminished neighborhood property values. They were threatening $500 in daily fines until the well was properly abandoned according to municipal guidelines. I had 72 hours to comply. Now, most people would panic at this point, call their own lawyer, start writing checks, maybe even give in to the pressure. But I'd learned something during my 15 years inspecting municipal water systems. When someone throws around legal threats about water quality, they're usually bluffing. I knew exactly which buttons to push. My first call was to the county health department. Emergency water contamination investigation, I told them. Potential groundwater issues affecting neighborhood safety. When you use the magic words emergency and contamination in the same sentence, health inspectors move fast. The inspector arrived the next morning with a full testing kit. Professional guy named Rodriguez who'd been doing water quality checks for 12 years. We pulled samples from my well, what was left accessible around the concrete, and from 3 neighbors' city water taps. The results came back 48 hours later and they were beautiful. My well water tested cleaner than the city supply, 0.2 parts per million chlorine versus 3.1 in the municipal water, lower bacterial counts, better mineral balance. My health hazard was actually the safest drinking water in the neighborhood. But here's where Rodriguez dropped a bombshell that made my water system's background tingle with possibilities. "You know," he said, scratching his chin while packing up his equipment, "city water's been under EPA scrutiny lately. 3 boil water advisories in the past year due to aging infrastructure. Hell, if you could get the proper permits, your well could legally supply half this neighborhood." That comment hit me like lightning. Years ago, I'd worked on a case in Ohio where a homeowner's private well became the backup water source for an entire subdivision during a municipal crisis. It reminded me that private wells aren't just personal conveniences in many states. They're actually protected as alternative public resources. Armed with the health department report, I filed a counter-complaint with the county. Destruction of private property, violation of due process. And here's the kicker. The HOA had violated their own procedures. No board vote, no member notification, no environmental impact assessment. Darlene's response was predictably hysterical. She started spreading rumors at the community pool that I was trying to poison the children. She claimed my well contaminated groundwater for neighboring properties despite having 0 evidence and plenty of proof to the contrary. The woman was throwing everything at the wall to see what would stick. She organized what she called an emergency HOA meeting to discuss immediate action regarding the Thornfield situation. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, and walking into that room was like entering a perfume chemical spill. Darlene wore enough fragrance to choke a horse, and in that cramped space, it created this suffocating cloud that made everyone's eyes water. I came prepared with a stack of water quality reports, test results, and legal documentation. While Darlene clicked her acrylic nails nervously on the fake wood table, click, 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 like a metronome of anxiety, I calmly laid out the evidence. "So let me understand this correctly," I said, spreading the lab results across the table like a poker player revealing a royal flush. "You're claiming my well is a health hazard, but the county health department says it's cleaner than city water. You're saying it violates HOA guidelines, but the well predates the HOA by 30 years. And you're threatening fines for a water source that's legally protected under grandfathered property rights." The silence in that room was deafening. You could hear papers shuffling as board members suddenly found their shoes very interesting to look at. The only sound was the nervous clicking of Darlene's nails, now faster and more frantic. But I wasn't done. I pulled out my phone and started recording perfectly legal in our state for meetings like this. "I'm curious," I said, letting my voice carry just a hint of the confidence that comes from knowing you're holding all the cards. "Has anyone here actually read the original HOA bylaws or the city water contract terms?" More uncomfortable silence. The board treasurer cleared his throat twice, but said nothing. Then I planted the seed that would grow into Darlene's worst nightmare. Because I'm starting to wonder what our city water contract actually says about private alternatives. I watched Darlene's face drain of color. She knew I wasn't some pushover neighbor who'd fold under pressure. She was dealing with someone who actually understood the system she was trying to manipulate. The meeting ended with a lot of throat clearing and promises to research the matter further. But as I walked out, breathing in the blessed fresh air after that perfumed torture chamber, I felt the familiar satisfaction of watching bullies realize they'd picked the wrong target. The real fight was just beginning. 2 weeks after the disastrous board meeting, Darlene decided to hit me where she thought it would hurt most, my wallet. I came home from grocery shopping to find an official-looking envelope wedged between my screen door and frame. Inside was a bill for $3,000 labeled as an emergency environmental compliance assessment fee. The accompanying letter, signed by all 5 board members, claimed the fee covered environmental remediation consultation and urgent legal review related to my non-compliant water infrastructure. They were demanding payment within 30 days, or they'd file a lien against my property. Now, I'd seen this trick before during my municipal days. A developer in Cincinnati tried something similar, using bogus fees to force out property owners who wouldn't sell. The tactic only works if you don't know the rules. Lucky for me, I'd helped write some of those rules. I spent that evening digging through the HOA's governing documents, all 67 pages of mind-numbing legal text that nobody ever reads until they need it. What I found was beautiful. According to Section 15.3 of their own bylaws, any assessment over $500 required a 2/3 vote of all homeowners, not just the board. They'd skipped that little detail entirely. My counterpunch was swift and surgical. I filed a formal grievance challenging the board's authority to impose the fee. I demanded a full financial audit of HOA accounts, which was my right as a member. And then I did something that really got under their skin. I started going door to door, educating my neighbors about their rights. The response was eye-opening. Mrs. Patterson from Elm Street had been fined $800 for planting unauthorized roses in her front yard. The Kowalskis got hit with a $600 penalty for installing a mailbox that was apparently 2 inches too tall. Young couple on Oak Drive faced $1,500 in fines for parking their work van in their own driveway. A pattern was emerging, and it stank worse than the algae bloom in the HOA's decorative pond. But the real bombshell came when I requested those financial records. Turns out the HOA's reserve fund had been mysteriously depleted by $47,000 in consulting fees over the past 2 years. Every single payment went to companies with names like Willowbrook Advisory Services and Community Enhancement Solutions. Guess who owned those companies? If you said Darlene's husband, you'd be absolutely right. This was getting juicy. The woman wasn't just power hungry, she was running the HOA like her personal piggy bank. Darlene's desperation showed in her next move. She hired a private security company to patrol my street, claiming my illegal excavation work. I'd been carefully digging around the concrete-filled well with a hand shovel violated noise ordinances. These rent-a-cops would drive by my house every 2 hours, shining flashlights and making notes on clipboards. The absurdity reached peak comedy when Officer Wannabe Gary would radio in every time I watered my tomatoes. I could hear his walkie crackling from 50 feet away. Subject is engaging in suspicious irrigation activity, requesting backup for potential noise violation. But Darlene wasn't done. She tried to have my utilities shut off for safety violations, claiming the excavation work created hazardous conditions. She spread her story to every local Facebook group, painting me as some kind of rogue homeowner threatening community safety. Meanwhile, I was doing my homework. Those late nights researching municipal contracts reminded me of my early days as an inspector, when I'd stay up until midnight reading water district agreements, looking for the loopholes and protections that most people never knew existed. That's when I stumbled across something interesting in the city's water contract, something that would change everything. The security harassment reached its peak when Gary the rent-a-cop tried to citizens arrest me for destruction of community property while I was checking my mail. Turns out, his security company didn't even have proper licensing. I filed complaints with the state licensing board and watched their contract get terminated within a week. But the real victory came at the next board meeting. Word had spread about the financial irregularities and the harassment tactics. 17 homeowners showed up, the most attendance they'd seen in 3 years. Mrs. Patterson brought her rose garden documentation. The Kowalskis had their mailbox violation photos. The young couple on Oak Drive brought their lawyer. What started as Darlene's personal vendetta against my well had become a full-scale revolt against her regime. The property manager, a decent guy named Steve who'd been watching this circus unfold, quietly submitted his resignation that night, citing hostile work environment and ethical concerns. Even the local newspaper got wind of the story. Someone, definitely not me, officer, had sent them an anonymous tip about HOA financial irregularities and harassment campaigns. By the end of that meeting, half the neighborhood was questioning every decision the board had made in the past 2 years. Darlene's voice got shriller with each question, her perfume seemed stronger, and I could actually see stress sweat mixing with her designer foundation under those harsh clubhouse fluorescent lights. She was losing control, and everyone could see it. The revolution had begun. Just when I thought Darlene couldn't sink any lower, she pulled out her trump card corruption at the city level. I was having my morning coffee, still savoring the memory of her public humiliation at the board meeting, when a city inspector showed up at my door. Not just any inspector. This guy had the swagger of someone who thought he was doing me a huge favor by even talking to me. "Marcus Thornfield," he said, consulting his clipboard like it contained the secrets of the universe. "I'm Inspector Bradley Wickham. We've received complaints about non-compliant structures on your property." Wickham, of course. Darlene's brother-in-law. He proceeded to declare my grandfather's 50-year-old tool shed unpermitted, along with the workshop where Grandpa had restored antique tractors. Apparently, my home office, where I occasionally did consulting work, constituted an illegal business operation that violated residential zoning. The final insult? He claimed the property should be condemned as a public nuisance. Now, I've dealt with corrupt inspectors before. Back in Toledo, I'd exposed a guy who was taking bribes to overlook code violations in apartment buildings. The trick is always the same. They count on you not having your paperwork in order. Too bad for Bradley. I had every permit, every approval, every grandfather clause documented and filed. I walked him to my filing cabinet and pulled out the original building permits from 1963 and 1978, still in their manila folders, edges yellowed but signatures clear as day. "Interesting," I said, watching his confident facade crumble. "These permits predate your employment with the city by about 30 years, and they're all properly filed with the county records office." But here's where it got really fun. I pulled out my phone and started photographing his inspection report, making sure to capture his badge number and signature. "Just for my records," I said innocently. "I'm sure your supervisor will want to review this thoroughly." The ethics violation complaint I filed with the city manager was beautifully detailed. Inspector conducting questionable review of relative's target property, potential conflict of interest, possible coordination with HOA harassment campaign. I'd learned during my municipal days that the magic phrase is potential liability exposure. Nothing gets a city manager's attention faster than the threat of a lawsuit. While I was dealing with corrupt inspectors, I was also diving deep into those municipal water contract documents I'd mentioned. Late nights in the city records office reading through decades of agreements, amendments, and addendums. It was tedious work, but I'd always been good at finding needles in bureaucratic haystacks. That's when I found Section 47B of the original 1987 city water contract, the exclusive service territory clause. Most people would skim right past it, just another paragraph of legal boilerplate. But to someone who'd spent 15 years in municipal water systems, it read like a time bomb with a very specific fuse. The clause was crystal clear. The city agreed to provide water service within defined boundaries, but, and this was the beautiful part, it explicitly prohibited the city from restricting private wells within the contract zone. Any attempt to force private well closure would constitute a material breach, making the entire contract voidable with 30 days' notice. Sitting there in that dusty records room, surrounded by decades of municipal paperwork, I felt like an archaeologist who'd just uncovered King Tut's tomb. This wasn't just about protecting my well anymore. This was about a $2.3 million annual contract that kept the city budget afloat. Darlene's panic was becoming visible to everyone. She called an emergency HOA meeting, the third one in a month, to vote me persona non grata. She tried to change community bylaws retroactively, making private wells illegal even for grandfathered properties. She hired 3 different law firms to send me intimidation letters, each one more desperate than the last. Her latest campaign was to force me to sell for the good of the community. She'd been going door to door with a petition, trying to get neighbors to sign a statement demanding my removal from the neighborhood. The funny thing about desperation is how it makes people sloppy. During one of her door-to-door campaigns, Mrs. Patterson called me laughing. Darlene had actually offered to help arrange financing for any neighbor who wanted to buy my property and restore it to community standards. That's when the pieces clicked into place. This wasn't about aesthetics or water quality or community standards. This was about money. Big money. I started making calls to my contacts in the real estate industry. Turns out, there had been whispers about a major development deal in our area, something involving the old farmland behind our neighborhood. The kind of deal that would require eliminating all non-conforming properties to satisfy city planning requirements. The kind of deal that would make someone a very nice commission if they could deliver a clean, uniform development package. Suddenly, Darlene's obsession with my property made perfect sense. She wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president, she was a real estate agent positioning herself for a massive payday. But what she didn't know was that I now held the nuclear option. One phone call to the city manager, and her husband's precious water contract would be history. The question was, how far was she willing to push before I had to use it? The breakthrough came at 2 in the morning while I was cross-referencing water contract amendments in my home office, surrounded by empty coffee cups and legal documents that would put most people to sleep. My attorney, Sarah Hendricks, had mentioned something during our consultation that kept nagging at me. "Marcus," she'd said, "municipal contracts from the 80s often contain clauses that modern officials don't even know exist. The devil's always in the details." So there I was, reading through the original 1987 city water contract for the third time, when Section 23C jumped off the page like a neon sign. How had I missed it before? The municipality hereby acknowledges and agrees to protect existing private water sources in perpetuity within the designated service area. Any action by municipal agents or affiliated entities to restrict, prohibit, or interfere with lawfully established private wells shall constitute material breach of this agreement, rendering the contract immediately voidable at the discretion of the affected property owner. I had to read it twice to believe it, then 3 times. Then I called Sarah at home despite the ungodly hour. "Sarah, wake up, I found it, the smoking gun." "Marcus, it's 2 a.m., this better be good." The city legally cannot force me to connect to municipal water. Not only that, any attempt to restrict my well voids their entire water contract immediately. The silence on the other end told me she was processing the implications. "Are you absolutely certain about the language?" "Crystal clear. And here's the beautiful part. I've documented 17 separate violations of this protection clause over the past 3 months. The inspector visits, the HOA harassment, the compliance orders. Every single action by city officials constitutes breach of contract. What we discovered over the next week made the picture even clearer. The current city manager, a bureaucrat named Patterson who'd been in office for only 2 years, had never actually read the original contract terms. He'd been operating off summary documents and amendments, completely unaware of the private well protections. But Darlene's husband knew. City Councilman Robert Wickham had been in office for 12 years. He'd voted on contract renewals multiple times. The protection clause wasn't some obscure legal footnote, it was a fundamental term that he'd sworn to uphold. Sarah's investigation revealed a pattern that stretched beyond my property. Inspector Bradley Wickham had been systematically targeting private well owners throughout the county for 3 years, 17 different properties, all subjected to questionable inspections, all pressured to connect to city water, all unaware of their protected status. The conspiracy was bigger than just a power-hungry HOA president. This was organized municipal corruption designed to eliminate private wells and force expensive city connections. But here's what made this discovery truly nuclear. The contract termination clause required only 30 days written notice from an affected property owner. Once triggered, the city would lose $2.3 million in annual revenue and face an emergency water crisis affecting 14,000 residents. I held the power to shut down municipal water service for the entire city. The weight of that responsibility hit me as I sat in my kitchen the next morning, watching the sunrise through the window where my grandfather used to drink his coffee. I didn't want to hurt innocent people. Thousands of families depended on that water service, but I also couldn't let corruption continue unchecked. The nuclear option wasn't meant to be used, it was meant to be threatened. leverage. The ultimate negotiating position. That's when I realized Darlene had made a fatal miscalculation. She thought she was dealing with some stubborn homeowner who'd eventually fold under pressure. Instead, she'd picked a fight with someone who now held her husband's political career, the city's water supply, and the entire municipal budget in his hands. The student had become the master. The hunted had become the hunter. And Darlene Wickham had no idea what was coming for her. The next morning, I made the call that would change everything. Not to the city manager, not to the media, to my old colleague Pete Rodriguez, the former city councilman who'd helped me navigate that Cincinnati water rights case 15 years ago. Pete, I need your brain for something interesting. Remember that case where we found the exclusivity clause loophole? Marcus! Hell yes, I remember. That developer thought he owned half the Ohio River until we showed him otherwise. What have you got? Within an hour, Pete was sitting at my kitchen table, reading through the contract documents with the focused intensity of a surgeon. Sweet mother of municipal law, he whispered. This is beautiful. They've been violating their own contract for years. Next, I called environmental lawyer Sarah Hendricks back, this time during civilized hours. Sarah specialized in water rights cases and had a reputation for making corrupt officials very uncomfortable. When I explained what we'd found, her excitement was palpable. Marcus, this isn't just about your well anymore. This is precedent-setting stuff. We could protect every private well owner in the state. But we needed more than legal firepower. We needed scientific credibility. That's where Dr. Jennifer Walsh came in, a hydrogeologist from the state university who'd testified in dozens of groundwater cases. When I showed her my water test results compared to the city supply, her eyebrows shot up. Your well water has better mineral content and lower contamination levels than what they're charging people $300 a month for, she said, shaking her head. This is environmental protection gold. The team was coming together, but we needed media coverage to make this stick. Local reporter Mike Anderson had been investigating municipal corruption for the Tribune, and when I called him about irregularities in the city water contract, he practically salivated through the phone. How fast can you get me documentation, he asked. I've been tracking suspicious inspector activities for months, but I couldn't find the pattern. Our strategy sessions felt like planning a military campaign. Pete laid out the municipal contract law angles while Sarah mapped the constitutional property rights violations. Dr. Walsh prepared her scientific testimony about groundwater safety, and Mike Anderson developed his media timeline for maximum impact. The beauty of our approach was its surgical precision. We weren't trying to hurt ordinary citizens, we were targeting the corrupt officials who'd been abusing their power. The contract termination threat would force immediate compliance without actually disrupting water service. Here's how municipal water contracts really work, something I'd learned during my inspector days. Cities depend on those revenue streams for basic operations. When contractors know a municipality might lose major revenue, they start demanding payment guarantees up front. It's like a credit rating drop that happens overnight. Our financial analysis revealed the true scope of Darlene's scheme. The HOA depended entirely on city water for the clubhouse, pool, irrigation systems, and common areas. If the municipal contract got terminated, they'd be forced into emergency water trucking at about $3,400 per day. Their insurance policies specifically excluded municipal service interruption, meaning they'd eat every penny of those costs. But the real pressure point was political. Robert Wickham's city council position depended on maintaining stable municipal services. If the water contract collapsed on his watch, his political career would be over. The other council members would crucify him for not knowing about the private well protections. We mapped out the timeline with military precision. Step 1. Document every contract violation with legal-grade evidence. Step 2. Prepare the termination notice with 30-day countdown. Step 3. Coordinate media interviews for maximum exposure. Step 4. Deliver the ultimatum at a public city council meeting. The psychological warfare elements were equally important. We'd time the termination notice for maximum budget impact right before the quarterly financial review. Other private well owners throughout the county would be watching, ready to file their own complaints. The ripple effect would be unstoppable. Sarah suggested we secure alternative water supplier contracts as insurance. If the city called our bluff, we needed backup plans for emergency water delivery. Within 2 days, we had agreements with 3 trucking companies and a bottled water distributor, even portable restroom services for city facilities, just in case. Those late-night strategy sessions reminded me why I'd loved municipal work. The scratch of pencils calculating water flow rates, the steady hum of Sarah's office copier producing evidence packets, the crisp sound of legal documents being organized in chronological order. We fueled our planning with endless pots of coffee and the righteous anger that comes from exposing corruption. But we also prepared the community quietly. I alerted supportive neighbors about potential short-term water disruption, helped elderly residents prepare emergency water storage, and coordinated with the school district for alternative water sources. The hospital and fire department already had backup systems, but we made sure they knew what might be coming. By Friday afternoon, we were ready. The termination notice sat on my desk, officially notarized and legally bulletproof. Media interviews were scheduled for the following Tuesday. My public comment slot was registered for Wednesday's city council meeting. The countdown was about to begin, and Darlene Wickham had no idea her world was about to collapse. Darlene's next move was so brazen it took my breath away. She cornered me in the cereal aisle at Kroger on a Saturday morning, looking around nervously like she was about to sell me state secrets. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice trembling with barely controlled desperation. "We need to talk. Privately." I kept loading boxes of granola into my cart, letting the silence stretch. In my pocket, my phone was already recording single-party consent state, perfectly legal. "I've been thinking about your situation," she continued, stepping closer until I could smell that suffocating perfume mixed with what I swear was stress sweat. "Maybe we've all been a bit hasty. The board has authorized me to offer you a settlement, $50,000, cash, to relocate somewhere more suitable." I turned to face her fully, making sure my phone picked up every word. $50,000? Plus all moving expenses, premium relocation package. The HOA understands that change can be difficult, and we want to make this transition as painless as possible for everyone involved. Her hands were shaking as she spoke. This wasn't negotiation, this was panic. "That's very generous, Darlene. But I'm curious, why the sudden change of heart? Last month you were trying to condemn my property." That's when she let slip the information that made everything click into place. "Look, Marcus, between you and me, there are larger forces at play here. Development interests, timeline pressures. My husband knows people who could make life difficult if this situation doesn't resolve soon." She was threatening me while trying to bribe me. The woman had lost all sense of reality. "Tell me about these development interests," I said, playing the concerned neighbor angle. And like a dam bursting, it all came out. A $12 million development deal for the farmland behind our neighborhood, mixed-use complex with retail, condos, and commercial space. But the deal required eliminating all non-conforming properties within a 90-day deadline to satisfy city planning requirements. "The developer promised me a 3% commission on the entire project," she whispered, glancing around like someone might be listening. "But only if I can deliver a clean, uniform development package. Your property is the last holdout." 3% of $12 million, $360,000. No wonder she'd been so desperate. But here's where Darlene made her fatal mistake. She mentioned that other private well owners had already been convinced to connect to city water. Mrs. Anderson on Maple Street, the Hendersons on Oak Drive, the elderly Kowalski couple who'd been too intimidated to fight back. "We've been very persuasive," she said with a smile that made my skin crawl. "Sometimes people just need the right motivation to see reason." I thanked her for the generous offer and promised to consider it carefully. Then I went straight home and called Sarah Hendricks. She just confessed to a conspiracy involving municipal officials, real estate fraud, and systematic harassment of private property owners, I told her. And I have it all recorded. But Darlene wasn't done. Her desperation escalated into full-blown harassment campaign mode. Over the next week, fake social media profiles started attacking me across every platform. Anonymous posts claiming I had a criminal background, financial problems, that my well water had killed a neighbor's dog, complete fabrications that spread like wildfire through local Facebook groups. She organized what she called a community safety rally, demanding immediate city intervention, packed it with supporters from outside the neighborhood, and fed them talking points about environmental hazards and property values. The crowning insult came when she convinced the city to schedule an emergency hearing on private well closures for the same day I planned to deliver my termination notice. She was trying to force a compliance vote before I could drop my legal bomb. But while Darlene was running around like a chicken with its head cut off, I was documenting everything. Screenshots of every fake social media post, photos of every harassment incident, recordings of every threatening phone call. My attorney filed cease and desist letters for the defamation campaign while preparing a much bigger lawsuit. The pattern of harassment, bribery attempts, and conspiracy was so clear that Sarah actually laughed when she read my evidence file. "Marcus, this woman has basically written our case for us. She's created a paper trail that proves everything: the corruption, the financial motives, the systematic targeting of private well owners." The beautiful irony was that Darlene's panic was making her sloppy. Every desperate move created more evidence. Every escalation dug her hole deeper. Meanwhile, I sat quietly in my kitchen each morning, drinking coffee made with my grandfather's crystal-clear well water, watching the sunrise and counting down the days until Wednesday's city council meeting. The termination notice was signed, sealed, and ready for delivery. The media interviews were scheduled. The evidence was organized and bulletproof. Darlene Wickham thought she was fighting for $360,000 in commission money. What she didn't realize was that she was about to lose everything: her HOA position, her real estate license, her husband's political career, and quite possibly her freedom. The hunter had become the hunted, and the trap was about to spring. On Monday morning, Darlene played her final, most desperate card, one so outrageous it belonged in a dark comedy about municipal corruption. I was reviewing my termination notice one last time when I heard heavy machinery rumbling down my street. Through the window, I watched a city truck pull up with Inspector Bradley Wickham and two workers carrying official-looking clipboards and red tags. 20 minutes later, my doorbell rang. "Mr. Thornfield," Bradley announced with barely concealed glee, "this structure has been deemed unsafe for human habitation. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises." He slapped a bright red condemnation notice on my front door like some twisted Christmas decoration. The official document claimed imminent structural failure requiring immediate evacuation pending professional assessment. The timing was surgical, one day before the city council meeting where I planned to deliver my nuclear option. "Interesting timing, Bradley," I said, pulling out my phone to photograph everything. "Mind if I ask what specific structural issues you've identified in the past week that weren't problems during your last 3 visits? His smugness faltered slightly. Foundation instability, water damage from your illegal excavation work around the well." I almost laughed. The foundation had been solid for 80 years, and my careful hand-digging around the concrete-filled well couldn't undermine a garden shed, let alone a house. But here's where Bradley made his fatal error. While he was waving his clipboard around, trying to sound official, I noticed something interesting tucked behind his inspection forms: a demolition scheduling sheet. The bastards weren't just trying to evacuate me. They were planning to tear down my house. "Brad," I said, pointing to the paper, "is that a demolition order I see there?" He frantically shuffled his papers, but I'd already photographed it. Demo crew scheduled for Thursday morning, one day after the city council meeting. They were planning to destroy evidence of my private well rights along with my house. I immediately called my construction industry contacts. Sometimes it pays to know people in every trade. Within an hour, I had Harold Morrison, a licensed structural engineer with 30 years' experience, at my house with his equipment. Harold's assessment was beautiful in its technical precision. "This house is structurally sound," he declared, measuring and documenting everything. "Foundation solid. No water damage, no subsidence. Whoever wrote this condemnation report either doesn't know what they're doing or they're lying." His written report, complete with photos and measurements, went straight to Sarah Hendricks along with an emergency motion for restraining order against the city. But the really juicy part came when Harold noticed something I'd missed. "Marcus, see those chalk marks on your foundation? Someone's been here recently, marking demo points, professional demolition crew markers." They'd been planning this for days. That evening, Mike Anderson from the Tribune called with breaking news that made my blood sing. "Marcus, you'll love this. I just got a tip from someone inside City Hall. Want to guess who requested expedited demolition permits for your address?" Let me guess it wasn't a coincidence. Robert Wickham himself filed the paperwork last Friday, claiming emergency public safety concerns. But here's the beautiful part. He backdated the structural assessment to make it look like the problems were identified weeks ago. Document fraud, federal crime, game over. But Darlene wasn't finished with her kamikaze mission. That night, she held what she called an emergency community meeting at the clubhouse, packing it with supporters and whipping them into a frenzy about my dangerous property threatening everyone's safety. I didn't attend, but Mrs. Patterson did. She called me afterward, laughing so hard she could barely speak. Marcus, you should have seen it. Darlene was ranting about structural collapse, foundation failure, contaminated groundwater. She actually claimed your house was going to fall over and crush the neighborhood children. The woman has completely lost her mind. But the most telling moment came when someone asked about the financial implications for the HOA if the development deal fell through. Darlene's response, according to Mrs. Patterson, was pure panic. We have to make this work. Too much is riding on it. Too many people are counting on us. The mask was completely off now. This wasn't about community standards or safety concerns. This was about money, and Darlene was willing to destroy my home to get it. Tuesday night, I sat in my supposedly condemned house, sipping tea made with grandfather's well water, surrounded by the legal documents that would end Darlene's reign tomorrow. The termination notice lay on the kitchen table, ready for hand delivery to the city clerk. My speech for the public comment period was written and rehearsed. Outside, I could hear the distant hum of the city's water treatment plant, pumping chlorinated water through aging pipes to thousands of unsuspecting residents. By Thursday morning, those pumps might be silent. The irony was perfect. Darlene thought she was playing chess, moving pieces strategically to corner me. What she didn't realize was that I'd been playing a completely different game, one where I held all the pieces that mattered. Tomorrow, the queen would fall, and the entire board would change forever. Wednesday evening, City Council emergency hearing. The chamber was packed tighter than a sardine can, with over 200 residents, 3 news crews, and enough tension to power the building's lighting. I arrived early and claimed a seat in the front row, carrying nothing but a single manila folder. Behind me, Darlene's entourage filled half the room, lawyers in expensive suits, supporters clutching printouts about property values, and HOA board members looking like they'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Darlene herself swept in 15 minutes late, trailing perfume and panic in equal measure. She'd brought a professional PowerPoint presentation, a stack of official-looking binders, and enough supporting documentation to choke a paper shredder. Mayor Patricia Williams called the meeting to order, her voice cutting through the nervous chatter. Tonight we're addressing emergency concerns regarding private water sources in the Willowbrook Estates development. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Darlene approached the podium, her heels clicking like a countdown timer on the hardwood floor. She launched into a polished presentation about community standards, complete with aerial photos of my property and charts showing declining property values. Ladies and gentlemen, she declared, her voice trembling despite her professional demeanor, we're facing a crisis that threatens the very foundation of our community. Private wells represent an unacceptable risk to public health and neighborhood property values. She showed photos of my house from unflattering angles, emphasizing what she called non-compliant infrastructure and environmental hazards. Her PowerPoint included testimonials from concerned residents and expert opinions from consultants whose credentials looked suspiciously thin. The city must act immediately, she concluded, practically shouting now, to enforce compliance and protect our families from these dangerous water sources. Scattered applause from her supporters rippled through the chamber, but I noticed most residents sitting quietly, arms crossed, waiting to hear the other side. Mayor Williams nodded politely. Thank you, Mrs. Wickham. Now, Mr. Thornfield, you've requested time to address the council? I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. The silence was so complete you could hear the ventilation system cycling and someone's nervous cough in the back row. Your Honor, council members, fellow residents, I began, my voice calm and steady. Before you vote on anything tonight, there's something you need to know about what you're really voting on. I opened my manila folder and pulled out the termination notice, holding it up for everyone to see. The paper seemed to glow under those harsh lights. This is a 30-day notice of contract termination for the city's municipal water supply agreement. I'm placing it on the city clerk's desk tonight because this council has systematically violated the private well protection clauses in their own water contract. The chamber erupted. Gasps rippled through the audience like a wave. I heard someone behind me whisper, "Holy shit, he can do that?" while cameras clicked frantically and reporters scribbled notes. I walked calmly to the clerk's desk and placed the notice down with a satisfying thump. Section 47B and Section 23C of the 1987 Municipal Water Contract explicitly protect existing private water sources in perpetuity. Any attempt to restrict these wells constitutes material breach, making the entire contract voidable. Darlene's face had drained of all color. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. City Attorney Johnson was frantically flipping through a thick binder, sweat beading on his forehead. Mayor Williams called for an emergency recess, her voice barely audible over the growing murmur of shocked conversation. But I wasn't finished. Before you recess, I continued, raising my voice slightly, you should also know that I have documented 17 separate violations of these protection clauses over the past 3 months. Inspector harassment, fraudulent condemnation orders, systematic targeting of private well owners throughout the county. I pulled out a thick folder of evidence and placed it next to the termination notice. This includes recorded conversations, admitting to bribery attempts, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, and document falsification. The chamber fell silent again, but this time it was the silence of people holding their breath. Mrs. Wickham offered me $50,000 to relocate so she could collect a $360,000 commission on a development deal. Inspector Wickham scheduled demolition of my house to destroy evidence of well rights violations. And Councilman Wickham backdated municipal documents to cover up their conspiracy. Darlene finally found her voice, shrieking across the chamber, "He's lying! He's blackmailing the entire city! Someone arrest him!" Her husband tried to slip out the back exit, but Mike Anderson's camera crew was already there. Inspector Bradley was nowhere to be seen, probably in his car, driving toward the county line. Mayor Williams gabbled frantically for order, but the damage was done. Half the chamber was on their feet, reporters were shouting questions, and the Wickham family's political dynasty was crumbling in real time. "I'm withdrawing this termination notice," I announced over the chaos, "on one condition. The city honors its original contract, fires corrupt officials, and protects the rights of every private well owner in this county." Standing ovation. Game over. Justice served. The aftermath unfolded like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. Within 48 hours, Inspector Bradley Wickham had resigned to pursue other opportunities, though we all knew he was trying to stay ahead of the criminal charges heading his way. The State Attorney General's office opened an investigation into document falsification and conspiracy, with Bradley's backdated inspection reports as Exhibit A. Darlene's political suicide was even more spectacular. She resigned from all HOA positions by Friday, citing health concerns and family obligations. Her real estate license got suspended pending ethics review, and that $12 million development deal collapsed faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. Turns out, investors don't like working with people under federal investigation. Her husband Robert lasted exactly 2 weeks before the city council voted him out. The other council members threw him under the bus so fast it left skid marks. His political career died the moment those TV cameras caught him trying to sneak out the back door of the municipal building. The best part? Darlene and Robert moved away within 60 days, selling their McMansion at a $200,000 loss. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that they relocated to Arizona, where apparently nobody's heard of their little corruption scandal yet. The new HOA board was a breath of fresh air. Led by Mrs. Patterson and her committee of fed-up residents, they implemented transparent governance policies and annual financial audits. No more mysterious consulting fees. No more arbitrary fines for unauthorized roses. The neighborhood actually felt like a community again. Getting my well restored was easier than I'd expected. A professional crew removed the concrete for $3,200, and when we tested the water afterward, it was cleaner than ever. I installed a commemorative bronze plaque next to the wellhead. Grandfather's Legacy, protected 2025. The legal precedent we set rippled far beyond Willowbrook Estates. The county passed a comprehensive private well protection ordinance, and my case got cited in 3 similar disputes across the state. Environmental law firms started using our strategy as a template for fighting municipal overreach, but the real victory was personal. Standing in my kitchen on a crisp autumn morning, filling my grandfather's old mason jar with crystal clear well water, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine peace. The gentle hum of the well pump, faithfully serving our family for generations, sounded like a lullaby. The community transformation exceeded my wildest expectations. Our Willowbrook Freedom Coalition became a permanent residents association that actually gave people a voice in neighborhood decisions. Property values rose 8%, due to increased governance transparency, and the annual audit requirement prevented any future HOA corruption. I decided to pay it forward with the Grandfather's Well Memorial Scholarship, funding local students pursuing environmental engineering degrees. Every year, we host the Clean Water Festival, offering free water quality testing for county residents and education about groundwater protection. My story got featured in the state environmental magazine, inspiring other homeowners to stand up for their water rights. The knowledge I'd gained fighting this battle was too valuable to keep to myself, so I started teaching water rights workshops at the community college and wrote a guidebook called Defending Your Property Rights, a citizen's guide to municipal contracts. It's helped dozens of families protect their wells from similar harassment. These days, my tomatoes watered exclusively with Grandfather's well water consistently win blue ribbons at the county fair. The new HOA president, Sarah Kim, brings me homemade cookies every month and always asks about the well's water quality. We even started a neighborhood tradition. Our annual block party includes a game called Pin the Tail on the Corrupt Official. Darlene would hate it. The house that was supposedly condemned and scheduled for demolition? It's still standing strong, foundations solid as granite, exactly as my grandfather built it. Sometimes justice really does prevail when ordinary people refuse to back down from bullies. Next week, I'll tell you about the time my neighbor tried to steal my driveway using fraudulent survey documents and a bulldozer at midnight. You won't believe how that one ended, but I'll give you a hint. It involved the sheriff's department, 3 lawyers, and a very embarrassed excavation crew. Drop a comment sharing your worst HOA horror story. I read every single one, and your experiences help other people know they're not alone in fighting these battles. And if this story helped you understand your rights as a property owner, hit that subscribe button. Remember, knowledge is power, and power protects your property. Sometimes the little guy really can win when he knows the rules better than the people trying to break them.